So we found a post on Twitter by Bleacher Report, which ranks the most dominant NBA stars at every position. And it asks us, how would you rank these players? All right, let's get into it. Let's start with the point guards.
You know what? I think that this overall list, or these lists that we'll be discussing, I have to take it that it means this player's overall career time, right? It just can't be just last season. So that's my basis, because what the post doesn't tell us is what the perimeter, what the baseline is. And so it leaves me as a fan of the game to determine what my baseline is and how I determine, where these players should rank in these lists, right? Because some of these players, I don't know. Yeah. So it gives me my opportunity to say, based on what I believe is the list, because there's no baseline parameters. So you may have something different and I may have something different, but at the end of the day, it's what I see when we're talking about these players. So for the point guard, what is it? We have Trae Young at number 3, Luka Doncic at number 2, and Stephen Curry at number 1. I have no complaints about this list. I have to agree with the ranking that this particular post indicates. I agree 100%. What about you?
I think all three are great in their own way. However, I would make one change. I would swap out Trae Young for Kyrie Irving. When Kyrie is available and able to play, his overall body of work, he's crafty, consistent, and unorthodox. He is an NBA champion. I think he's a top 5 point guard in the NBA. The thing with Trae Young is he's great, but he's streaky, very hot and cold and inconsistent, and will continue to shoot the ball when he is ice cold, ice tray. That's why I got to go with Kyrie Irving. He's so skilled, and he hardly ever misses. So I would have Kyrie Irving as number 3. I'm okay with Luka Doncic. I'm telling you, he took a big leap last season under head coach Jason Kidd. Maybe Coach Carlisle just wasn't doing it for him. Now his step back 3 is money. And then we know Steph Curry, all time, like 3-point leader, like what? Could literally take over a game. So I have him as number 1. I agree with this list here. All right, so let's move into the shooting guard position. This one's really tough. They have number 3, Donovan Mitchell, Paul George at number 2, and then number 1, Devin Booker. Interesting.
Yeah. What is your take on it?
Well, I think Donovan Mitchell is questionable. I think Donovan is questionable for me because he's not consistently clutch in big moments. I think he has a bigger name than this guy that I swapped him out for.
I think that Donovan Mitchell, based on the 3 players that they provided to us, for me, his positioning on this list is appropriate. He should be number 3 if we're going to maintain, just the 3 that they have, right? So yeah, no, Donovan Mitchell, whether or not he should be on the list is, I don't know if he should be on the list, but since he is, number 3, I guess, is the best way to put him, best position to put him for the list of 3. So yeah, Donovan, I agree with you. Donovan, he has some work to do, only because I think that, and maybe a new coach will help him, right? So it's no slight on his skill, and I think Donovan Mitchell has something he can dig deep into. But with the turmoil that's currently happening with the Jazz, let's just see what his future looks like. But again, number 3 on this shooting guard list, based on the names that they're provided, is appropriate for him.
Oh, okay. So I would swap out Donovan Mitchell for Zach LaVine.
That's a good swap.
I put Zach LaVine as the number 3 most dominant shooting guard in the NBA. I have no problems with Paul George and Devin Booker being 2 and 1 respectively. No problems whatsoever.
Yeah, I did have a problem with that. For me, I would swap it. For me, it would be Paul George number 1 and Devin Booker number 2. And I say that because of the complete body of work that Paul George has been able to produce. Paul George has made it to the playoffs every season he's played except 2015 and 2022. And he's done it on each team that he's been on. One thing about Devin Booker, which separates him from me being able to be in the number 1 spot, is that Devin Booker, although he's been with the Phoenix Suns for quite some time, his introduction to the playoffs is on the back of Chris Paul. That's the only reason why, right? I know that Paul George has been able to do that with the Pacers by him, with other players. He has been able to do that with OKC, and he's also been able to help the Clippers move into the playoffs. So had Devin Booker been able to make it to the playoffs without Chris Paul, and I can't wait to see what that looks like in the future, then I would say, okay, then maybe we have an argument there. But that was my differentiating factor between 1 and 2. And for me, Paul George, overall body of work, warrants him another number 1 spot for me as a shooting guard based on these players. So I have Paul George is number 1, Devin Booker is number 2, and based on this list, Donovan Mitchell is number 3.
Okay, that's fair. But I would like to make a note here. You said
Mm-hmm.
Paul George was able to do that with OKC. I just can't agree with that. That was all Russell Westbrook's doing. I'm just saying.
That's fair. Okay.
All
Okay. Hmm. But
right.
he's been,
So,
but I still maintain that he's been to the playoffs every season of his career except 2. Devin
okay.
Booker has not.
Okay, that's fair. All right. So for the small forward position,
Mm-hmm.
I'm looking at Jimmy Butler at number 3, Kawhi Leonard number 2, and Jason Tatum at number 1. No problem with this order whatsoever. I couldn't have come up
Nah,
with something better myself.
nah, no, 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 no. Disagree. 100% disagree with the order of this list.
Okay.
Number 1, disagree. Jason Tatum, for me, can't wait to see what he does in the future. He just needs more experience, in my opinion. To be number 1 in ranking, absolutely not. Number 3, yes, and that's where I put him. So should he be on the list? I have no problem with him being here. But at number 1 spot, I disagree with that. So my ranking would be Jason Tatum at number 3, um, uh, Jimmy Butler at number 2, and of course I'm gonna put Kawhi Leonard at number 4. His body of work speaks for himself. It just does. And so when Jason Tatum supersedes Kawhi Leonard, then I question what is the baseline of this particular list. What was the author of this list? What was his mindset? What was that person's mindset when they put this list together for the small forward? Because Kawhi Leonard is a 2-time NBA champion. He's a 2-time Finals MVP, like Defensive Player of the Year. Like I know because he may not be as popular, he may not be as favorable to people because he missed games, like every other player missed games. But when he missed games, the reason why it's so impactful because he can change the game, right? And so that's why when he doesn't show up, fans and pundits are all in arms. Like, why he can't play? Because he's injured, just like every other player. However, I do believe that Kawhi Leonard is a game changer. And when he is in the game, you must account for him, right? And when he shows up, his proof of that was in 2019. 1 year in Toronto is the year that they won the championship. So came to the Clippers, will be changing the franchise. For me, the future is bright for the Clippers when it has Kawhi Leonard on their roster. So for me, number 1, Jimmy Butler, the only reason why I have him at number 2, I don't believe he's number 3, but what's missing for me and Jimmy Butler is when will he hoist his NBA championship? Because I'm waiting for that. And once he gets that, then I believe the argument is a little bit more greater for him. But right now, Kawhi Leonard number 1, Jimmy Butler number 2, Jason Tatum number 3.
Okay, yeah, you go hard for Kawhi Leonard. Now, I think it's impressive that Kawhi is number 2 on this list because we hadn't seen him play in a long time. Maybe there's a
It's
little
been a
recency
season,
bias.
one
Well, I'm
season.
sorry, one
It's been a
season.
season. Okay.
Okay, maybe there's a little recency bias here because Jason Tatum did make it to the NBA Finals. I think he is the face of the franchise for the Boston Celtics. And you know what? Honestly, he can get you a bucket.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, he can get you a bucket and a stop. And
Mm-hmm.
his defense is
Mm-hmm.
fantastic. Now, Kawhi Leonard at number 2, I'm okay with because of the absence, because of his lack of availability. We know Jimmy Butler, playoff Jimmy, he can't be stopped. He will push his body to full and complete exhaustion. So I'm okay with this list the way that it's numbered. I know if Kawhi Leonard had played last season, there would probably be a different order on this list. You know what I
That's
mean?
fair. That's fair. That I can most definitely respect that. One thing I can say about Kawhi Leonard, and I'm gonna always get on my soapbox for Kawhi Leonard. Although we may question whether or not he'll play, but when he gets on the court, there is no question about his game, and so that's why he'll always be number 1 based on this list right here.
Okay. All right, that's fair. So power forward. I'm looking at an old vet in LeBron James at number 3, Kevin Durant at number 2, and Giannis at number 1. Any issues with this order?
Yes, when we're talking about complete body of work, that's why I needed to understand what was the baseline of these lists. Because if we're talking about the team that they're currently playing on, then that means for the small forward, Kawhi Leonard would not have showed up because he didn't play last season, right? So I had to take the body of work. And when I take the body of work that these NBA players have been able to produce, some have been in the game a little bit longer than others, this list for me is, for the power forward, is unfair. Of course, LeBron James is number 1, in my opinion. Like, what else is he supposed to do? What is it, 20 years in the league? I mean, he is the self-proclaimed GOAT, and everybody loves him, and he has been able to, at the power forward position, back when he played that. Now, I don't know what that looks like right now, because doesn't he play point guard? Like,
Well, you like point
point forward? I mean,
point forward, yeah.
what is it? So that's what I'm saying. At the power forward position, when he first got into the league, and all the awards and accolades that he's been able to garner over his years, he's number one. We're talking about ranking the stars, right? So he would be number one on my list. Kevin Durant, I'm fighting number two, and I would only switch Giannis to number three
Mm,
because of his limited time when we're comparing him against LeBron James and KD. However, I love Giannis, and for me, Giannis is going to be the future. Of number one in this position eventually. So just based on the
mm.
players that are here, that's the only reason why I'm making that statement.
Well, I have no issue with the order of this list because, in my opinion, these are the top three dudes in the NBA in this order. I think LeBron James is third best, KD is number two, and Giannis surpassed both of them in the last year or two as he won his NBA championship and also two-time MVP. I think the league is shifting, and that's
No,
what we're
I agree.
seeing, and this list reflects that.
I agree.
I can't be mad at Giannis at number one. The
No,
hard work
no.
that he puts into his game, he may not spend $1.5 million on his body like LeBron James, but he put forth $1.5 million worth of effort and
He does.
energy on the court on both sides of the basketball.
Yeah, see, that's the thing about this list, especially for power forward. I agree with that. But so did LeBron James earlier on in his career. That's my thing. So until I identify, or this particular person tells clarifies what their baseline was, I'm going to have to go with the body of work. And when we're talking about the body of work, yes, everything you said about Giannis, 100% agree. Are we talking about the last few seasons? Or are we talking about their body of work? And that's where I am struggling when we're talking about ranking the stars, right? So, yeah, of course, right now, if we're talking about the last few seasons, I have no problem with LeBron James being number three. But if we're ranking the star, I'm going to have to take their overall body of work. And for me, number three is not fair. He should be number one. That's just it.
Okay.
And, so it's what y'all think. Drop down in the comments and let me know.
Yeah. All right. So let's move on to the center position. I mean, they have Rudy Gobert at number three, Joel Embiid number two, and Nikola Jokic at number one. I'm interested to hear your take on this.
I have no problem, none, with this ranking at all.
Really? Rudy Gobert at number three.
Based on the list, based on the names, yes, based on the names. Can there be somebody else to replace him? Absolutely. But if just this list alone, these players alone, I have no problem with Rudy Gobert being number three at all.
Oh, okay.
None.
Okay. So
None.
I basically replaced Rudy Gobert with
Wait,
someone who I think is way more dominant than him. I went with Carl Anthony Towns at center.
I like that. Okay.
Yeah, his new teammate. Now, the reason why is because if I remember correctly, the post asked us most dominating. Rudy Gobert doesn't give me domination. Like, he doesn't do that for me. He doesn't dominate the game, but Carl Anthony Towns can. So I put him at number three. Also, I would like to switch the order between Joel Embiid and Nikola Jokic for the same reason. Jokic isn't necessarily dominating, but Joel Embiid is on both sides of the basketball. He's athletic, he can get up, and he can put fear in your heart. Jokic doesn't give me fear at all. So I put Jokic at number two, Joel Embiid, the most dominant center in the NBA, at number one.
I don't have a problem with the list, and here's why. From a traditional center position where all you do is stand up under the basket and you get rebounds and you do putbacks, Rudy Gobert does that, right? What we have seen over the years is that the center position has evolved. And what Joel Embiid and Nikola Jokic gives me is that evolution. They
Mhm.
can, yes, manage the paint. Yes, they can block a shot. Yes, they can, get it in, and but they can also step outside the paint and be just as profound, just as effective as any other player on the floor at that time. That's the difference between Rudy Gobert, Joel Embiid, and Nikola Jokic. That's why I separate the two. So Rudy Gobert, traditional center, number five. You number three. You sit there, and that's what it is. I agree with your Carl Anthony Towns swap. I ain't no problem with that either. The reason why I still have Nikola Jokic number one and Joel Embiid at number two, not that they cannot both do what I just mentioned, step outside the paint and be just as prolific. One thing that adds to the two-time MVP in Nikola Jokic is the fact that he's also able to primarily handle the ball. His passing ability is amazing. So he has expanded for me the role of a center in this. When we're talking about these three players, a little bit more than what Joel Embiid has done, and maybe because his system that he's in grants that for him, right? So Nikola Jokic in this list gives me the edge up. Number one, because he is two-time MVP. Now, whether or not he earned both of them and how your feelings on that, it doesn't matter. In the record books, he's two-time MVP. I will say
Mm-hmm.
this as well, but I believe if you've watched him play, he can also handle the ball. And that's one thing I have not seen
Mm-hmm.
Joel Embiid do. Not saying he can't do it, and maybe his scheme doesn't allow for him to do it, but I think that Nikola Jokic adds that to the number 5 center, tall, big position that
Mm-hmm.
gives him a slight edge, in my opinion, and why I put him as number 1. So my list is Nikola Jokic at number 1, Joel Embiid number 2, and Rudy Gobert number 3. So I agree with the list.
Okay.